Hola, buenos dias. That's about it for the Spanish, I'm sorry. We're going to go to English now. I thought to do a kind of very abbreviated overview of my work, because I don't think many people have seen a whole lot. So anyway, that's what I decided to do here. And I'm going to talk about my life a little bit because it's kind of intertwined in the work in a particular way, I guess. So, I was born in 1951 in Santa Monica, California, and moved to Redondo Beach when I was about 8 years old, and was a practicing skateboarder and surfer. And that's kind of what I did as I grew up. I started making sculpture when I was 15 years old because a friend of mine, his older brother, made welded sculpture. And I was very turned on by this and became kind of obsessed. And got some jobs and saved my money and got a welding set. And so these images are really the last, they're very poor images, but they're really the last works I did in sculpture. The first ones, which I don't have any of, but they were much more biomorphic and not informed by contemporary art per se. They were perhaps a mix of Giacometti, Hieronymus Bosch, and West Coast psychedelia kind of meshed together. So I did that from the time I was 15 to 18 and continued, and then I moved to the East Coast in upstate New York to Woodstock before the festival, but not much before the festival. And I continued making sculpture there, and I saw a show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York called Painting and Sculpture from 1940 to 1970. So during that show I saw, basically the entire New York school of contemporary artists all at the same time. I'd never seen any of this before in my life. And it immediately affected my work. I was, extremely excited and just started working with process, working with painting the sculpture, layers, working with wire mesh, and eventually actually started making sound from the material, which in retrospect was somewhat of a bridge to working with electronic media. So while I was in Woodstock, I really by chance happened upon video. There was a place called Woodstock Community Video, and I didn't really know what it was. I just basically knocked on the door, quite literally. And the director brought me out what's called a porta-pack. This is probably something that weighs 30 pounds. There were no camcorders then. And showed me quickly how it worked, and I started playing around with it. And then I asked him for another porta-pack so I could record myself and then record myself interacting with my pre-recorded self. And what strikes me about this, again in retrospect, because you don't really know what it's about at the time, was the difference of well, very different than making sculpture. It's, immediate, real time, but it had something to do with looking at your mind and your behavior outside of yourself, almost like if there was a third party. You could mediate things about not only what you perceived, but what you were thinking, which made it considerably different, actually, on the other side of the world from film or image making or what have you. So I was hooked. I mean, this is, I began doing that very quickly, and I even got a job with them, helping with town board meetings and this kind of thing, so I could use this equipment. So around the same time, get used to the system here, I did also some word pieces. In fact, this work here, I don't remember the title, it's from 1970, was derived from a psilocybin experience with a typewriter. You can't really see the words, but I was interested in how the writing could actually be somewhat like sculpture, and you could get into the frame and context of the way it's laid out on a page, and also using different, like these bracketing systems and different materials on what would be the page. So I did a few of these. This one, that stripe at the top was a piece of tape that was around a stretched canvas of some kind. As the paint was dripped around the bend, it accumulated this, kind of abstract little landscape of sorts. And then I wrote this text having to do with these paint drips from left to right where the words slowly disappear. So that just kind of established things that now have become kind of prominent in my work. That is the self-reflexive nature of video and the kind of primal sense of language that's, directly connected to mind. So the first installation video work I made was 1974. It was called Hole in the Wall. And what that consisted of was, it was kind of a performance installation, I suppose. The camera zooms in and frames an actual size area, actual size meaning that if there was a monitor there and you put your hand there, it would be approximately the same size. And this was an external wall, and you see the process. It's the whole process is recorded of cutting, drawing the rectangle, cutting through whatever layers there are. Could be insulation, wallboard, wood, whatever, to the outside. This is actually an exterior wall. And this whole process is recorded in real time, and finally a monitor is inset into the wall, and the recording is played back. Then I kind of went off on a tangent, barking up the wrong tree, I suppose, which was having to do with image processing and, what can you do with the image, and how many ways can you manipulate it, or have control over it, or computer control it, or put that pixel here and that pixel there, yada, yada, yada. And that just doesn't really interest me. And I made a work called Around and About, which I'm going to play for you, which somewhat established something for me that was a necessary element, which is what you're reading here actually is was written much later. But again, in retrospect, I understand what the importance of what it meant, which is basically that to cite something, to recite something, is connected to, through etymology, to actually move, to make motion, to a kinesis, and finally to cinematography. So in fact, cinema is not necessarily images, but it's speaking. So I'm not going to see if this works. So I'm going to play this work for you. It's about 4 minutes. Another thing about this is that rather than, the way this was made was a text was written, laid down, and then in the space I was in, I had a couple of cameras going through a kind of a do-it-yourself box. And each image was basically edited assembled in real time. There were nothing having to do with collecting images, deciding on images. Everything was decided there, mostly because the particular image wasn't really important. It was really the text that was driving the thought behind the work, which is really what is it about? What is the space between us right here about? What is the space slightly outside of here about? Etc. Sort of playing around with inside and outside the box. So I'm going to see if I can make this play now. That's good.
I'm sure it could have gone another way, a completely different way, a way that hasn't ever come to mind, but that's a given. One can never observe all the possibilities and still go on to the next. Sometimes one just exits and enters again. I think I can agree with myself that it's not a matter of choice. You might think that agreeing is a kind of choice, even a blatant choice, but that's not all you're interested in either. There's another determining factor, and that's what we have to concentrate on. At least I do. I agree, it's easy to get sidetracked. It's not even that there's a lot going on. We're just busy. I mean, it's not complicated. You can go on, I can go on. We can assume there's something happening or not something happening. I don't know. Perhaps it's unfair to go on. Maybe we should take our minds off it, think about something else. Maybe it's not worth thinking about at all, but that leads to other things just as problematic. Maybe it should be more complicated. We're looking at it too simply. Look, we don't have to consider all the possibilities, but instead really complicate one, if that's what you want to do. I don't know. Maybe it's my fault. I came unprepared. I'm not ready to be complex. I don't think that's the answer, though. I don't think it's an answer we're looking for. In certain ways, that's probably obvious by now. Even knowing that you're a little uneasy with it, and I am too. But I think it's a way I can work with now, and maybe you can, and maybe you can't. I mean, I'm thinking about that. There's time involved here, and it's yours as much as mine. I certainly don't want to threaten your time or make you feel you have to be decisive, yet I want you to be here. I mean, I assume you are here, but I don't want to back you into a corner, and by the same token, I don't want to start from that corner. That's a particular relationship I would like to put aside for now. I know this isn't free of bullshit. I mean, I'm coming from somewhat of a self-conscious place. It's a kind of stacking. I mean, the ideas just pile up but aren't interwoven. They're not connected or disconnected. It's a thought, at least. I can see it. Disembodied ideas being thrown against a wall. But that isn't fair. That isn't fair for me or you. That really kind of loads things down, and that's not my intention. I can assure you of that. I want you to be with me. I mean, you don't have to listen. Just hear me out. I don't want you to be involved in deciphering anything, but then that's your prerogative, and I don't want to get in your way. There's something that can be said for that, and I hear you, but I don't want to listen to it. I realize it's easy for one to say that I'm being ambiguous, but I don't think so. I mean, if you want to leave, you can do that, or you can just turn off. I'm not trying to say I'm indifferent. I just think there's a way here. Maybe you really do hear me, and I'm going on and on, but we have to continue for some time. I mean, I think that's part of it. It would be easy to stop at this point. It would just be interesting and over and possibly boring, but that isn't even the issue. It's important that we go on. This is the way I think it has to be right now. If it wasn't this, it would be that, and there's still this area we have to get through so that the this and the that won't become significant to this. I mean, what I am talking about isn't important in that way that importance draws attention. You might even think this is a game of some sort, but really, you've tried ways that were adjacent to this one when you weren't thinking about the consequences. You may even have heard this before in so many words, but I want to go on. I'm not interested in this kind of talking. It has its purpose, but it can get very sticky. I would rather settle with you, some way that's non-reversible, a way of being with you when it's the only way. When I arrived here, I had no way of knowing it would be this way. I thought about it a lot in the beginning. I tried different ways of thinking of you, what your response would be, and that has to be considered now too. I've never lost sight of that. I don't think there's been a loss of anything. It's just that I haven't been accumulating things for me or you. There's always time for a sense of urgency. I want to avoid that for now. I don't know though. Maybe you're waiting for that, waiting and listening.
So that image is there about 5 hours and the piece is over. Let's see, this one. I don't know if you noticed, but it's that word, there's a, for each syllable, there's a change of the image in some way. So you have the sense of the speech itself, the physicality of the voice, providing locomotion or automation for there to be something happening. Without it, it just stopped. So I'm going to just briefly touch upon 3 works that involve the term I like to avoid, but I'm just going to say it now and get it over with, interactivity. This first piece is called Mesh. It's from 1978. It doesn't look like it's from 1978 because it was refabricated from vacuum tube monitors and about a 10-foot wall of handmade electronics to a G5 Mac computer and flat screen displays, which made it actually a much better work because it was more in keeping with the architectural nature of the wire mesh and the idea behind it. So what happens, this thing, sorry about that. There is a kind of band around the whole space of 1, 2 to 3 layers of wire mesh that is at different gauges from, say, 1/16 of an inch to 4 or 6 inches. And there's 4 bare little speakers on each wall, and the sound pans around the room, staying very close to the wall because of the nature of these kinds of speakers. There's no bass, there's no resonance, so that the sound tends to stay very localized. And there are square wave frequencies. That's kind of like well, if it was very slow, it would sound like tick, 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 tick. So where you see the larger gauge, that's exactly what you would hear, a kind of a parallel frequency to the gauge of the wire mesh. In some instances where there is 2 layers, you would get phasing similar to the moire patterns you would get from 2 gauges of wire mesh. So what happens is for each person that enters into the room, their head or face is a still image that is grabbed on the first monitor, and the rest are sequenced to the next monitor. There's one on each wall. And the structure of the image is quite visible because it goes from quite low resolution to about, 256 by 256. So you're always aware of the architecture of the horizontal and vertical construction of the image. Then once you're in the room, there are 2 places where you can get further enmeshed into the work. The architecture of the image then changes further. There's just some stills. Of course, they're stills, so you can't really see much. But then, let's see, 15 years later or so, I did a work called Tall Ships, which is a corridor about 90 feet long and 10 feet wide. Well, let's see, 27 meters long and 3 meters wide and 3 meters high. It's very dark. So dark, in fact, that if there's people in there, when you first go in, you'll probably bump into somebody. And the images are produced by, let's say, handmade projectors. They're actually 4-inch tube monitors with a surplus lens that is put on the face of them, and which produces a very, well, relative to a normal video image, a very, not a very bright image, but once you become accustomed to it, it really doesn't matter anymore. But they're very, I would say, dreamlike. That's putting too much meaning in it. They're, kind of like they're ghostly. They're not clear, but clear enough to certainly make out people. And the piece is basically about encountering yourself, really, by when you walk in. All these figures are in the distance, perhaps sitting down, but nevertheless they're in the distance, and they walk toward you until they're about actual size, and will stay there for basically as long as you stay there. But there are global decisions that are made that would make them sometimes walk away, or sometimes down the hall a figure will walk out when there's nobody there, so the light changes and attracts you further into the work. And at the very end of the hallway is a child, which happens to be my daughter. She's 5 years old at the time. And the reason I wanted a figure here was so that we didn't have the feeling of kind of an infinite hall, or a hall of mirrors, or that there was some kind of completion, although because of her gesture, it had a sense of suggesting a future. And the title actually came from, I struggled with the title actually, and when I finally saw it, I knew it was the title. That happened in a delicatessen in Seattle, where they had historical pictures of tall ships being taken out of Lake Union, where they were going to build a bridge, and they would no longer fit. And as soon as I saw the word tall ships, it just kind of clicked into the right association's not really the right word, but anyway, if you imagine a tall ship coming at you on the open sea, how they have a kind of majestic quality to them, and to give the human figure that is frail in comparison, this kind of association seems the right thing. Like, and also once there's viewers there and the light is changing and things are happening, there is that sense of, you know, ships passing in the night. Then about 3 years later, I made a work called Withershins. I think that term is a term referring to witches going around a church in the reverse direction, i.e. counterclockwise. And this piece is somewhat about actually handedness. I'm left-handed, and I've done a lot of work with handedness and left and right brainedness and this kind of thing. So the text, there's a text that you hear spoken, there's actually not a single text, it's just phrases that are triggered as you walk through this maze. If you enter one side, it's a woman's voice, and the other side is a man's voice. And so two people can interact in here, and others are ignored until they release the text. And I actually have I made a work, a single channel work from, well, let me explain it further actually. The image that you see on the wall there is a signing of one walkthrough, conceptual walkthrough that I wrote, as if I was walking through most of the maze. And this person signed the entire thing. So that's playing on the wall, and it's asynchronous with what is actually happening. But it's highly self-reflexive, so that there's always kind of a connection anyway. So on the opposite wall that you don't see is the back of his head. And so when he refers to the mind or the brain, you'll see his hands go up, motioning toward his head. So what I did for a single channel work was I edited that single walkthrough, where every time he puts his hand up, it edits to the back of his head. I'm going to play some of that just so you have an idea of what the nature of the text is. Just another image of it. The single channel work is called Goats and Sheep. And that title comes from, there are some passages, you know, in the interactive work, there's that word again, which is actually referring to a biblical phrasing. There's several biblical phrasings, and at the right hand you do not know what the left hand is doing, and the Lamb said, and in this case though, it's I think it's a Matthew saying, having something to do with the sheep are in the right hand, the goats are in the left hand, the goats will go to hell and the sheep will go to heaven. In other words, there's a kind of negativity about left-handedness, like gauche, sinister. It still prevails today. We are an oppressed group of people. But it's subtle. So, here is a little bit of that. I hope.
And if the right hand was ingrown backhandedly, and what if the left hand knows that the right hand knows what the right hand is doing? Is the left undone? And what if the left hand was ingrown deep in the mind, speaking in many-handed ways, growing old in a maze? From one word to the next, questions arise, and eyes inflict words, and right inflects left. From one word to the next, Left inflects right, and this inflicts that. Hand back and forth, and that inflects this, and words reflect back from one word to the next. Questions arise in many-handed ways. Is the left hand, and so the logos goes. And if the left hand knows what the right hand is doing, thrown as it is, the right wrote the left, a handwritten hand, blown across the flesh. And if a handwritten hand, folded inside, handheld thoughts, a number of instructions, lost between hemispheres, left for dead, the other mind, beside yourself. And if the left hand has a hole, would the right hand then know? When a hand is the other hand, which hand is back and forth? Two nodal hemispheres play havoc in your skull. The mind can't help but mince, and suddenly you are beside yourself, entertaining a party of two, only to fall back. A few words, a few steps gone by, a number of instructions on the way language moves. From point A to point B, proceed accordingly inside a book, outside a hand, swept mind, laid bare, and if the written word left the last word in the palm of one hand clapping back, and the right hand was an ear out of the other's mind. The left hand spoke, and the right hand opens the books, laid bare. The left hand does not know what the right hand did not know. Hands divide, and word by word, language moves, begins to circle over the book. The writing is on the wall, and the left is not reading it to its next reflexive moment, to its next reading, in a way, sideways, way inside, positioned in prayer.
Well, that goes on for about 12 minutes. So if you imagine if you were in the space, then, two people or one person.
This.
Oh, sorry about that.
That.
Anyway, yeah, so two people or one person, you walk around and what's interesting about this is that it's language and the architecture of the maze which gives some kind of intention for your movement. It's not like you come to a point and you have to make a decision that is going to like a signpost. It's more like you're feeling the text and where you are in terms of perhaps dead ends, or in this case in the maze, there are certain places that are mirrored or spiral-like kind of constructions, and the text infers this in different ways as you move around. The other thing to note is that the maze, in terms of the text modules, is not just two-dimensional. It's at times about 6 layers deep. So in other words, if you were to walk back and forth, it's not going to say, and if the right hand, and then you go back, and if. It's going to go, and if the right hand perhaps did not know. So it has a depth to it that is almost impossible to exhaust in some sense. So, like I said, when I came across video kind of happenstantially, and I'm going to show this work too. It's a part of the reason is that I've run into a number of people here that are thinking about visual, how sound and visual components, you know, is there something about this? Is there some way of speaking about this? And also the idea of synesthesia. And I think this kind of falls into that ballpark in some way. But it is from 1982, so it's a little bit, you know, it's from a go. So I'll just play that for you. There's only one part. I never did the next part.
This, that, and the other thing. Things are going to happen. Happenstance. Standing in the thick of things, like sticks in the mud. Things are going to happen. Moments, notice, standing in a moment's tune, thought, provoked, dumb, struck by the momentum of a tree, the gnarled character of its being, the way it visits the temples and the groin, teaching the body-mind to be taught to talk with your mouth open. Nothing surrounds them. They are open. They speak of nothing but themselves with perfect reason. I am talking them out into the open. They sit like deer in a field. If I approach them too quickly, they fade into the quick of things. Silence is always there. There is silence when I stop to take a breath. When I see breathtaking things.
I see we're kind of running out of time, or I'm running out of time, I guess. So I'm going to have to go a little quicker if you want to see more things. I'm going to show you two works now that were sort of made at the same time, and they're somewhat political in nature. It's not something I visit very much, at least explicitly. For me, all art is political implicitly. But these are a little bit more directed for different reasons out into the world. So this piece is called Frustrum, and it consists of a computer-generated eagle trapped in a pylon electrical tower structure, and it moves around and hits the wires. And in front of it is a pool of petrol oil. It's about 8 meters long, 4 meters wide, or 3 meters, I don't know, something like that. And then in the middle of it is a bar of 425 ounces of pure gold. And there are what became known as ripple generators right below where the screen meets the oil, so that when the eagle's wing goes below the lower edge of the screen, it meets its reflection in the oil, and a ripple generator underneath the surface of the oil pumps up rippling oil, and it laps upon the bar of gold. The sound to this was all made from bullwhipping, mostly the cracks, but also just dragging a bullwhip on the floor. And the cracking of a bullwhip is uncannily sounds like the zapping or the arcing of electricity. So there was a high degree of synchronicity between this kind of electrical sound and bullwhipping. And to do this, I actually went on the internet and found a professional, actually a world-famous bullwhipper in Minnesota, who had held the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of cracks, something like 200 with 2 bullwhips. And when a bullwhip cracks, that is actually breaking the sound barrier, if you can kind of get that idea in your head. There's just some other images of that. So it's quite loud. It's very aggressive, and in this piece there's a kind of suggestion about gold as real money compared to fiat currency, and also some notion that there is also fiat art and the real stuff. And on the bar of gold, This is actually the gold being made outside of Paris in a secret location. So on the bar of gold is this sentence: for everything which is visible is a copy of that which is hidden. This is actually a Gnostic text, and it almost sounds a little bit like a Zen koan, but it could also refer to the question of whether Fort Knox has its gold or not, and if it doesn't, where is it? So these are just some shot of the oil being pumped into the. This is all at the Cartier Foundation, which, as you know, makes gold jewelry. And the other piece I did it's called Gilt, which consists of telescopes that are trained on coins that I had specially made. They're 2-ounce gold bullion coins, which have images of myself punching myself in the face. And they have, each one has a kind of Latin phrase, like time on our hands is blood on our hands, the exclusion of one, or the inclusion of one is the exclusion of the other, guilty mind, guilty body, this kind of thing. And they rotate once every 2 minutes, so it's very slow. So when you're looking at them through the telescope, there's a kind of heavenly body optical charge to it. And at the point, at the location of where you look, there are ultrasonic speakers that you can only hear when you're in that position. So there's 5 coins, all different phrases and portraits, because I felt guilty about what's going on in the world and I'm not doing anything about it, basically. But gilt is a play on words of guilt and gilt as gold. So the back of all the coins had my ass sticking up in the air being spanked by a laurel branch that is on the 1-ounce gold coin of US. And it says, art is a vile body, and
something you can get your head around, something to make sense out of.
I'm going to play that in a second. So it says, a stone's throw away from a whirlpool of errors, and it just claims that this is 2-ounce, 0.999 fine gold, etc., etc. And it says, in wonder we wonder, instead of course, in God we trust. So the text that you're hearing when you're standing underneath the, looking at the telescope, is really about the political situation at the time. It's pretty much the same. And it's very aggressive, and I'll just play some of that for you so you get an idea.
Thanks. Stats, data, something to rifle through, something you can get your head around, something to make sense out of it all. Numbers, disfigurements, tortures, rapes, mutilations, decapitations, collateral damage, disappearances, human slaves, human shields, numbered bodies, numbed minds, bloody cherished documents, laws, memos, acts gone awry, crimes against humanity, nasty roadside attractions, emaciated, bloated beings, terminations, secret cells, bunker busters, warheads, warlords, genocide machines, treasury notes afloat, poppy fields, tonnage, the distinct extinction possibility. What do you want? Victims, witnesses, perpetrators, names, places, times, names, places, times, names, places, times. Are we there yet? Peak oil, it all, that's history. We're at peak time. This is the time. Time is rolling over for the come what mays. It's May Day. Fucking May Day. Close the hatch, we're going down. The walls are melting up and the sky doesn't give a rat's ass. Take a side, stand the fucker down. You're either with us or a tourist. Sound familiar? Do you like familiarity? Do you like your home? Do you like your children? Do you like your bed? Tell me something. Do you like your mind? Does it feel right? Does it feel like a right mind? Maybe it's reeling, really getting ready to rock. Maybe you're gonna play dead when the donuts finally roll. No turning back now. Better lay down.
Anyway, you get the idea. So this is the production shot of back poems. I just thought I'd show you that. See, it's, you have to do certain things to get what you want, you know? So this is a more recent work. It's called, it's really hard to see things, isn't it? Terrible, terrible slides. I'm really bad at that. They're not even slides anymore, are they? So this is a work called Cutting Corners Creates More Sides. And what I did was I took, I made a 12, 15 meter long black table in the studio and arranged, not really arranged, just kind of piled whatever I could find, mostly tools, household things, domestic things, from about the size of a piece of dust to about a chair. And they were just lined up behind each other, kind of like just a pile of stuff. And so, and then I had two cameras that had macro zoom lenses on them so that the depth of field is almost non-existent. So there was about 40 slices of focused layers. So the two cameras would, focus through all these things, and at some point in these piles, there would be a point at which they would create a horizontal continuity, but only for a moment, and then they would collapse into their separate frames. So in the installation, instead of the objects, the things, I kind of recreated the same table, made it as if like a kind of portable installation device. And yes, instead of the things were different kinds of speakers, so they sort of replaced the things. So the tonality of the voices that moved down the table would slightly change based on the materiality of the different speakers. And I'm just going to play you 2 minutes. I have 9 minutes left. So here's just some close-ups. So here is just the video component put together so you have an idea. So this is what it looks like.
I'm closer to grasping what is exactly happening. I limit myself to rummaging through piles of surplus, boxed accoutrements, and that unaccounted for miscellania. Relationships with those things tend to invert in rather insidious ways through troughs of slow time. I only ruminate on certain ones, the ones that seem to appear and disappear for no apparent reason except that at one time or another I assumed them. It's come to the point where carrying out the simple task of doing one thing after another only happens with great difficulty. Thoughts can't hold words long enough, allowing them to cure, thereby giving me ingress to my own instruction set that I might follow. Not that there aren't words in any sense of the word, it's just their way of pressing up against me, of not wanting to tango, as it were. They are decidedly uncooperative, making the liquidity of thought next to non-existent. The playful specters slip free of my desires and proceed to taunt me. An inability to differentiate one from another has me closing my eyes, humming to myself, hoping to resonate with my very own bones. For an instant, I envision each word wearing a Venetian mask. Together they mischievously switch their cloaks just behind the lid of thought. The moment I begin to verbalize, pictures of the very words I try to fit my mouth around morph into Boolean lookalikes, and my utterance turns to garbled nonsense.
Okay. So that goes on and gets actually more localized in terms of perception and closer to what you're actually seeing and what the speaker is going through. Anyway, so this work is I had the opportunity, well, I didn't think of it as an opportunity at the time. I was given a residency at a place called the FIIXIII Glass School, and I've never thought I would ever make glass works, but I ended up making 3 or 4 actually. And this piece is called Inasmuch as It Has Already Taken Place. And it's actually like it's like an after image or a ghost or an ecological, geological, well, not even that, what's the word I want? Well, anyway, excavation of my own work, of this work actually, which is called Inasmuch as It Is Always Already Taken Place, which consists of 16 images of actual size of my body that are looped, but with an invisible loop, that is that the beginning point is the same as the end point, so they're continuous. I can say much more about that, but I want to show you these new works. So again, this is this kind of after image of that work. There are no images, there are no wires. It's just a kind of spirit. That's that. And if you're lucky enough to be there at night, the glass actually had a surface front made out of this special material from coral, so that it actually glows in the dark. Another work I did is called a Klein bottle with the image of its own making, which is a direct reference, actually, homage to Robert Morris's piece, A Box with the Sound of Its Own Making. So a Klein bottle is actually a continuous surface that does not have a clear inside and outside, something like a 3D Mobius band. Really just various images of that. And I made some glass bombs based on Fat Man and Little Boy, atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan in 1945, thinking about the kind of the fragility of the bomb and sort of deconstructing the idea of it through the delicacy of glass. I also dropped one and recorded it with a high-speed camera, but I don't have that. So here they are. Some bombs. They're about 3 feet long, just to give you an idea of the size. Another work I did was called Alodia Piorn, which is, you can't really see anything right now, but when I was at this FIIXIII, there are a lot of artists there and people taking workshops and trying to make things. And they tend to discard whatever doesn't work out. And there's a lot of, I mean, not necessarily everything's interesting, but there's just a lot of debris, glass pieces. And I collected these and made up words for each piece. There's about 200, 300 pieces and words. I have some close-ups. Yeah. So, here. I didn't really use a system per se, and there's a lot to talk about systems, but if you're trying to do something in actual, complete real time, there cannot be any system, because if you're here and now, there cannot be the time to have created the system. So it was really kind of a 0-point moment for each piece of glass and assemblage letters. So anyway, I think we should have some questions if you have any.